Hello everyone. In the last two videos, we shared many beautiful lakes and mountains and charming towns in Bavaria and Austria. In this final episode, we'll talk about Salzburg and our visit to the Munich Residenz, as well as the delicious food and travel tips and lessons we learned. In the last video, we mentioned Rossfeld Panorama Strasse, one of the filming locations for The Sound of Music. Almost 60 years have passed, yet the landscape remains almost unchanged. Speaking of The Sound of Music, naturally, we must talk about Salzburg next. Salzburg is Austria's fourth largest city, located right on the border between Austria and Germany. It's actually more convenient than Munich for visiting some German attractions like Königssee and the Eagle's Nest. Salzburg is known as the City of Music and has always been an important part of the Holy Roman Empire. Its two most famous claims to fame are being the birthplace of Mozart and the filming location for many scenes of the phenomenon movie The Sound of Music from 60 years ago. From our vacation rental in the German town of Berchtesgaden, it took us about half an hour to drive to Salzburg. Since the main attractions are in the old town, where parking is challenging, we parked our car in an outer park and ride and took a bus into the city. Our itinerary was mainly based on The Sound of Music filming locations, with some additional must-see spots like Mozart's birthplace. Our first stop was Schloss Mirabell, or Mirabell Palace, a must-visit in Salzburg. Salzburg is one of the few cities in Austria and Germany that retained its original Baroque style, as others were bombed during World War II. Schloss Mirabell is a prime example. This palace, over 400 years old, was built by the archbishop for himself and his mistress. In those days, the archbishop was essentially the local ruler, with the combined political and religious power at the Holy Roman Empire time. The palace itself is not open to the public, but its garden is a highlight, featuring various sculptures, fountains, and flowers. It's one of the most popular parks in Salzburg. Many scenes from The Sound of Music, including the famous Do-Re-Mi sequence, were filmed here. We made sure these iconic spots are not missed. From Mirabell Palace, it's a 3-minute walk to Mozart's residence. The old town of Salzburg is compact, with major attractions close together, making it easy to explore on foot. Mozart's birthplace and his residence are in different locations. The birthplace is on the other side of the river. We visited both. You can buy a combined ticket or separate tickets for these two places. While the buildings themselves are not particularly impressive, visiting Mozart's hometown is a way to pay homage to the musical genius. It's said that the open window on the third floor is the room where Mozart was born. A 5-minute walk west from Mozart's birthplace brings you to Münchsburg, a small hill with an observation platform located in the Museum of Modern Art. For a small fee, you can take the elevator up for a spectacular view of Salzburg's old town. Comparing our photos with the scenes from The Sound of Music, you can see that hardly anything has changed here in 60 years. From Münchsburg, a short walk east leads to the famous Horse Well. It's called the Horse Well since originally, it was truly a place for horses to drink and bathe, akin to a modern car wash. The central horse sculpture is lifelike and impressive. This location also appeared in The Sound of Music. Next, we visited Residenzplatz, the heart of Salzburg's old town. Flanked by the new and old residences to the east and west and the Salzburg Cathedral to the south. The square's centerpiece is a grand Baroque fountain, the largest Baroque fountain outside of Italy. Residenzplatz is a central landmark that appeared multiple times in The Sound of Music. Adjacent to Residenzplatz to the south is the Salzburg Cathedral, which still holds the baptismal font where Mozart was baptized. The cathedral's organ is reputedly the largest in Europe. The cathedral's green bell tower is a prominent feature visible from various high points in the city. The square outside the main entrance connects with Residenzplatz and is also worth a visit. Northeast of Residenzplatz lies Mozartplatz, with a statue of Mozart in its center. Crossing the square and walking a bit north brings you to the Salzach River, a tributary of the Danube. The entire city of Salzburg was built around this river. Both Salzburg and Salzach derive their names from Salz, the German word for salt, as there used to be many salt mines in this region. So Salzburg is essentially Salt City, and Salzach Salt River. The riverfront is scenic, and the Mozartsteg Bridge offers great views of the riverbanks. Our next stop was the famous Hohensalzburg Fortress. Returning from the river to Mozartplatz, Residenzplatz, and the cathedral, it's about a 10-minute walk south. Along the way, you'll pass Kapitellplatz, another square featured in The Sound of Music. The square now features a large golden sphere with a sculpture on top, overlooking the fortress. Hohensalzburg Fortress, seen in the background of photos from Mirabell Palace, is situated on a hill and dates back to 1077, making it one of Europe's largest medieval castles. The fortress is impressive, although it has seen little military action. The closest to action it saw was in the 16th century, when it was besieged by a group of peasants and miners, but was never taken. Its main attraction is the panoramic view of Salzburg Old Town and the surrounding mountains. There is a saying that if you come to Salzburg and don't visit this fortress, it's as if you haven't been to Salzburg at all. To get into the fortress, you can take a funicular up, and either take the same funicular down or walk back down. We chose to walk down, since we wanted to visit the Stift Nonnberg, the convent from The Sound of Music, and it's faster to walk directly from the fortress. It took us just a few minutes walking to the convent. The convent, dating back to 714, does not allow visitors inside, but the exterior is worth seeing. Although it might seem like just an old, dark church now, its connection to the movie has made it a popular spot. Early risers can listen to the nuns sing at 6:45 a.m. every day, offering a peaceful moment overlooking the serene city and mountains. After the convent, we decided to visit the house where the Von Trapp family lived in the movie. It took us about 20 minutes of walking to get there, but the scenery along the way was well worth it. Located by a quiet lake, the house, or officially Schloss Leopoldskron, was once the Archbishop's palace and is now a hotel. We walked to the opposite side across the lake and enjoyed a nice view of the house in distance. Back at our vacation rental, we watched The Sound of Music again, finding the familiar scenes even more special. Our last stop of the spring trip was back in Munich, focusing on the Munich Residenz, since we already visited most of the attractions at the beginning of the trip. Unlike the fairytale castles of Neuschwanstein and Linderhof, this is a real palace, the largest city palace in Germany. The Wittelsbach family, who ruled Bavaria for 8 to 9 centuries, used this palace for 6 to 7 centuries. It feels like the rulers never wanted to stay in their predecessors' rooms. After centuries of construction, the palace has over 130 rooms open to the public, taking at least 2 to 3 hours to tour. We bought a combined ticket for the Treasury, the Residenz, and the Kuvelies Theatre. Despite being exhausted by the end, it was worth it. The Treasury's exquisite jewels and ceramics, the grandeur of the palace itself, and the theatre's atmosphere all showcased Bavaria's historical wealth and cultural level. Unfortunately, many parts of the Residenz were not original and were rebuilt after World War II, as Munich was heavily bombed by the Allied troops. Behind the Residenz is the Royal Garden. Although smaller than the gardens of Nymphenburg Palace, it is still beautiful and worth a visit. The Diana Temple in the center is a notable feature, although it was also rebuilt after the war. After visiting the Residenz, we treated ourselves to some local beer and Schnitzel at a well-rated beer house. The portion sizes were amazing, more than enough for the two of us, and it tasted great. We also ordered some beer, as you can never go wrong with beer in Munich. One of the beers, called Radler, we first thought was just regular beer. But it tasted refreshing and sweet. It turned out to be a mix of beer and Sprite, something I never thought they would use in Munich, the beer capital. Originally, we planned to visit the famous Hofbrauhaus or Royal Beer House, but were deterred by its poor reviews, so we just looked from outside and took a few pictures. Instead, we opted for this smaller beer house, which turned out to be a great choice with good food and friendly service. Besides beer and Schnitzel, Bavarian specialties include pork knuckles and white sausages. We tried some pork knuckles in Berchtesgaden, which were crispy and tender but maybe not as tasty as the Schnitzels. As to the white sausages, we bought a couple of pieces from a grocery store and boiled them for breakfast according to instructions from some YouTube videos. Contrary to our expectations, they turned out to be surprisingly good, similar to a slightly firmer version of luncheon meat. Alright, let me summarize a bit about our 2-week trip in Bavaria and Austria. First, Bavaria and the Austrian mountains are packed with attractions, from scenic lakes and mountains to castles and charming towns, making it one of the best places we've visited. 2 weeks felt way too short. May is an ideal time to visit, with attractions open and favorable weather for hiking and sightseeing. The only place that was worth mentioning is the Eagle's Nest, which just opened 2 days before we visited for the 2024 season. Also, the milk hut at Königssee was not fully ready with milk cows yet. The weather forecast is not always accurate. Before we went, rain was in the forecast for all days, which forced us to shuffle our itinerary a bit. However, except for only half day of rain in Berchtesgaden and 1 cloudy day visiting Salzburg, we never saw any bad weather. Driving is convenient and saves time compared to public transportation. Though be mindful of the need for a vignette sticker on Austrian highways and the risk of speeding fines. I was caught speeding once by a camera. It cost me €30, and the rental car company charged an additional €30 of service fee. German food exceeded our expectations, with local delicacies mentioned before and various international options. The last meal we had in Munich was a bowl of Chinese beef noodle, which tasted surprisingly authentic. Fresh honey from our Munich Courtyard Hotel was a delightful discovery, too. Our accommodations, especially the vacation rentals in Old Town Füssen and in Berchtesgaden, were highlights. Interested viewers can request links in the comments section. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share if you enjoyed our Bavaria and Austria spring trip series.